Welcome again to another Executive Exchange. I'm Sean Kevelighan, CEO of the III. Really fortunate here today to join us with somebody that we've worked with for many years at III, Dr. Phil Klotzbach with Colorado State University's Department of Atmospheric Science. Dr. Klotzbach is known around the world really for his ability and the department's ability to put out the hurricane forecast. And we are right around the corner from that. In fact, June 1st starts hurricane season. So Dr. Klotzbach, what can we expect this year?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Sean. It's great to see you here. So we are forecasting an above normal Atlantic hurricane season, a total of 19 named storms. So those are storms named by the National Hurricane Center. Of those 19, 9 reaching hurricane strength. Those are storms with winds of 74 miles per hour or greater. And of those 9, 4 becoming major category 3, 4, 5 hurricanes, winds of 111 miles per hour or greater. And while those storms on average only make up about a 20-25% of all the storms that form in a particular year, when you take these storms and normalize the damage that they cause by population, inflation, and wealth, they cause about 80 to 85% of the damage. This is an above normal season. An average season has about 14 storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes. So, obviously we've seen, a lot of storms. We've seen a lot of damage in recent years. Obviously 2020, a lot of 2020 was kind of dominated by the pandemic, stole the headlines, but obviously it was an extremely damaging hurricane season. And it was one of those things where we saw a lot of storms, but we saw a lot of storms hitting in a very similar area. And we did a paper just on the last 2 months of the 2020 hurricane season, because we had, 5 major hurricanes in 2 months at the end of the season, which was crazy. So, the insurance industry, how do you respond when you get kind of it's one thing to respond to one event, but how do you handle it when you get these multiple events in succession?
Well, the pandemic is a great illustration of this industry's ability to step up and adapt. We like to say at III that there's this ongoing disruption continuum. Natural catastrophes are here, and just because we're in the midst of a pandemic, we had to still fulfill and pay claims, and we did just that. And we continue to do that. We've got an immense amount of capital on hand to make sure that we can keep our promises. But also during this time, what we try to do is remind people it's a good, strong reminder of what you're talking about, just how long this season is and how it doesn't quit until the very end. And so we like to say, if you're living on the Gulf or Eastern seaboards of the United States and inland, right? Inland's now important. We saw last year with Hurricane Ida that caused a significant amount of inland flooding. Same with Harvey a few years back. Unfortunately, not enough Americans have the right type of flood insurance for their homes. We would see in that inland area of the United States where Ida's path was, the average really was under 5% in terms of take-up rate from flood insurance. So on June 1st, this time of year, we encourage people to make sure that they have the right type of insurance. Make sure that you understand, read that declarations page. It's a one-pager, tells you about your coverage. Call your insurance professional. Make sure that you understand what it's going to cost to rebuild and that you have the insurance for that. And then again, I'll circle back to flood. Make sure that you have that separate flood insurance policy. It's a separate policy, not directly with your homeowner. So make sure you have it. And even on the automobile side with hurricanes again often cause automobile damage. If you have comprehensive insurance coverage, you will be covered if it floods or it rolls over from the wind damage. So lots to think about, but really now is the time to start thinking about it. Because Dr. Phil, tell me a little bit about, let's get into the climate and climate risk and climate change. In the hurricanes, you mentioned the severity element of it and that it's increasing. Talk a little bit too about the frequency. Why are we seeing more severity in your mind versus really a flat, if you will, it seems to me, of what we're looking at from a frequency standpoint?
Yeah, so we have certainly seen an increase in severity of hurricanes hitting the United States, say over the last 15, 20 years. If we look longer term, we really don't see longer term like an increase in the number of, say, landfalling hurricanes. That number has been fairly flat. over, say, the last 100 to 150 years, as best we can tell, given the fairly limited data that we have. But we certainly are seeing more damage caused by these hurricanes just due to, growth in population and growth in exposure along the coastline, more people, more stuff in harm's way. When it comes to climate change, we've just published a paper kind of looking at this and looking at global trends in storms. So not just in the Atlantic, but in the Pacific and Indian Oceans as well. And if we look at trends globally, we've actually seen a decreasing trend globally in the number of hurricanes, although there is an increase in the percentage of the strongest storm or the strongest hurricanes. And some of that is actually due to the fact that the Atlantic and the Pacific especially tend to go opposite of each other. And so, the Atlantic's been extremely busy. The last 6 years have all been above normal hurricane seasons. Obviously, 2017, Harvey, Irma, Maria, 2018 with Hurricanes Florence and Michael, 2020 with Laura, a whole cast of other hurricanes as well. And then 2021 with obviously Ida being the most damaging hurricane. We have seen a lot of above normal seasons in a row. And a lot of that's due to the fact that we've trended more towards La Nina, which is colder water in the eastern and central tropical Pacific. When that occurs, it tends to increase hurricane activity in the Atlantic, but it actually knocks down storm activity in the Pacific Ocean. And the Pacific Ocean is a much larger ocean, a lot more warm ocean water. So bang for your buck, you're going to get more storms, more severe storms, more typhoons, more hurricanes in the Pacific in El Nino than you are in a La Nina. So the Atlantic and the Pacific tend to go opposite of each other. So globally, we've always seen an increase in damage and an increase in the strongest storms. We've actually seen a decrease in overall number of hurricanes, but the Atlantic, since La Nina favors Atlantic storm activity, we've actually seen an increase in the Atlantic Ocean over these last 6 years. And unfortunately, this year, we are also anticipating, more likely to see La Nina this summer and fall, likely leading to our 7th above normal hurricane season in a row. So, it's kind of this, long-term trend, just basically, a long-term trend that we've seen over the last, say, 6-7 years of just this increase in the number of storms, the severity of the storms, as well as obviously the storms making U.S. landfall. And I did want to kind of double back with a question for you about, as you mentioned with Hurricane Ida, the storm made landfall in Louisiana, caused a tremendous amount of damage, about $60 billion, but the storm went inland, was officially declared post-tropical, so it no longer, had tropical characteristics, and yet it still was able to cause over basically about $15 billion in damage in the mid-Atlantic states. And I think that's something with people living along the coast, they tend to think it's a coastal threat, but when storms move inland, you kind of tend to forget about them. And these storms, can obviously cause big threats well inland. And so, I guess the question that I have is, you mentioned earlier about flood insurance. And I know obviously, like as you move further inland, it's not necessarily required, but what's your recommendation for people living inland about flood insurance? Say that they think that there's no way they can flood. What's your recommendation?
It just our recommendation at Triple I is it doesn't hurt to get your flood insurance. More and more we're seeing floods impact more than any other natural catastrophe. Were impacted by floods. They're devastating natural catastrophe, and they're a part of many other types of catastrophes. So you have to pay particular attention. And in this country, most of the flood insurance can come from the National Flood Insurance Program. However, we're seeing an increase in private flood insurance availability as well. It's just a matter of contacting your insurance professional, because to your point, and you can go on www.resilience.iii.org, and we actually have mapped out flood insurance take-up rates for the entire United States by county, and you can see that whole swath of where Ida went up, the Appalachian region and such. You can see the whole swath is less than 5% in terms of flood insurance take-up rate. It's devastating that Americans, when they don't have it and they get flood damage, because simply the government will not provide you with the coverage like they would if you had the insurance policy. So it's a critical component of it. Dr. Klotzbach, I think we've probably run our course of time. As always, you're just immensely informative. We look forward to hearing from you more and more throughout the hurricane season with updates. I know these updates are tremendously accurate. In fact, maybe perhaps you can leave us with that anecdote with just how accurate your forecasts have been historically.
Yeah, so we do our first forecast in early April. We'll update it on June 2nd. July 7th and August the 3rd. And these forecasts do tend to have better levels of skill as we get closer to the events we're trying to predict. When we look historically at our hurricane forecast, we've been doing, this is our 39th year. We started all the way back in 1984 at CSU, founded by Dr. Bill Gray, almost 40 years ago. These forecasts are quite accurate. Most of the time, there are years where it busts, but in general, the forecast can get the number of hurricanes plus or minus 2 in an average year. So say, our forecast in April was 9. On average, that forecast is going to be somewhere between 11. The verifying number is going to be somewhere between 7 and 11.
That's incredibly close, and I think a lot of Americans need to know that. And again, it's time to check your policies and make sure you have the right type of insurance. Dr. Klotzbach, thank you, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.